Welcome back, everyone. Croeso nôl to our final session of the day. I hope that you've all enjoyed the sessions. I've certainly found them all very interesting and informative, and I think loads of different consistent themes throughout, but also some really, really useful insights into individual kind of practices in different parts of Europe as well as across the UK. Our final session today is focused on maintaining fidelity to the Housing First principles here in Wales, and you'll be familiar with our accreditation process that we established a number of years ago. And this is, we're going to be talking about today a new reflective exercise that's been developed as part of that accreditation journey. And I'm really delighted that we're going to be joined by two people who've been through it themselves. Alex Osmond, who is our Housing First Policy Manager, who coordinates with Kat, our colleague, the accreditation process and everything that goes with it. And also Abby Williams from Conwy, Denbighshire Housing First, because Conwy, Denbighshire were the first ever service in Wales to go through the accreditation process. So they were first up to try this new reflective exercise. So this is going to be a quite informal conversation with the two of them. If you've got any questions, please do feel free to put that in the Q&A, and we hope you'll find this interesting and informative. So Alex, tell us, what is this reflective exercise? Can you describe it a little bit for us?
So we never wanted the accreditation to be a kind of one-off tick box exercise, and there's that element of kind of continuing good practice and continuing reflection. So in terms of what it is, as the name suggests, it's a kind of reflective exercise that that we facilitate with the service involved, the team involved that we kind of worked with several years prior, to basically kind of guide some of their reflections, but a lot of the work is done by the team itself. So they go off and come up with a few kind of things that we asked them to identify. I won't list all of them, they're in the report, but things like some kind of key lessons that they've learned since the original accreditation was awarded. We do look at the recommendations that the first report made again, just to look at how things have kind of come on, how they've developed, how things might have changed. Certain things might not apply anymore. Some new things might apply. There's a case study that we asked them to kind of come back to us with, where they kind of perceive it as a particularly interesting or kind of useful example of housing first in practice, and again, the one in the report is really interesting. So yeah, it's in terms of the work that we do as Cymorth, it's facilitating a few meetings, and then the team kind of discuss amongst themselves and do that reflection that's so key to housing first, and a psychologically informed approach, and kind of we regroup and put together a report and go from there.
And as ever, it's a case of the service and you as the Housing First Policy Manager and Kat, our Housing First Policy Officer, kind of working together in that kind of constructive way. So absolutely posing challenge when that needs to happen, but doing so in what we hope is a really supportive and constructive way that continues to support the evolution and development of Housing First in line with the principles. And again, like the accreditation, it's not about judging quality or the sort of thing that a commissioner would do. It is strictly about fidelity to the principles, because we know that that's so important. And the accreditation process itself is a very rigorous one. It takes quite a while. There is a lot of paperwork, interviews of all sorts of key people within the service, using the service, key stakeholders. And I guess this is it is lighter touch, isn't it? Because, we do put projects through the ringer when they do the accreditation process first time. When you were developing the reflective exercises, were you kind of taking inspiration from any other practices that you'd come across, either across the UK or Europe?
Yeah, so we wanted to strike that balance between maintaining that dialogue, but without, as you say, doing this really kind of full-on intensive process just kind of again when a service will be delivering intensive support and they'll have plenty of things to worry about anyway. So we tried to strike that balance, and we also didn't want to kind of overthink things too much. So specifically, I was thinking about the Scottish equivalent of the process. They have what they call sounding boards, where again the team kind of a Housing First team, will kind of do some initial work, and there's some kind of criteria, and they look at the principles and so on, and then they kind of come together as a sounding board. And what they try and do is involve someone external, who's obviously not involved, and various people do that. And I've contributed to some of these sounding boards in that role. And again, it's kind of very informal, very reflective, just kind of discussing kind of how things have gone, certain sort of sticking points, I guess, how things are developing for Housing First for that service, and its partners. So partners are represented too. So we just kind of were influenced by that. And, we have our own accreditation process, that initial process, and maybe what comes later on. But we thought this more reflective approach struck that balance and kind of made sense.
Yeah, definitely. And Abby, you're the first service to undertake this new reflective exercise. So I don't know whether you're sick of being the guinea pig in all of these things, but you shouldn't be so keen to be the very first,
I know.
So did this reflective exercise, did it kind of make sense to you? Was it a helpful process for you and the team to undergo?
Yeah, of course. I think that it's always important to bring back to the roots of Housing First. And obviously, while you're out there completing the intensive work that we offer and the support, not that we get lost at all, but it's just nice to be reminded of why you're here, why you're doing it, what you're in line with, what the belief of the project and the principles are, and just bringing us back to that really, and refreshing my mind as the team manager, and then pushing that down onto the ground really. And when I go out on visits, remembering why we're here, because obviously it is very busy, it is very chaotic at times. Obviously we've got a lot to deal with the characters that we meet along the way, and it's just it was nice to do the reflective, especially after the principles were amended, and apply them again basically.
Yeah, that's another kind of quirk of this process, is that Conwy Denbighshire underwent the original accreditation process with the original Housing First Wales principles, and since then many of you will be aware and will have been involved in the principle review that we undertook over the last couple of years, and tightened up, I think, some of those principles, learnt from how Housing First has practically worked in Wales, both in terms of being able to kind of meet the needs of people in Wales and the particular context here, but also I think emerging issues where it was clear that we needed to be robust on fidelity to certain principles and make sure we're being really, really clear about our expectations with certain principles. So did this exercise feel different to the original accreditation? You were involved as a support worker when the project was initially accredited.
Yeah.
That must have been daunting, the first one to undergo the big accreditation process. And did this feel a little bit different this time?
Yeah, so I was part of the project when it began in 2019, and then within the year, I had Alex at my side in Rill and covering Conwy and Denbighshire. And it was just interesting for me to be part of, really. But yeah, it was intense. Obviously, he's coming out with us as support officers. He was meeting our citizens along the way, obviously looking at how we operated, how we worked, providing some feedback for us, little bits to touch up on, where we needed to push on a little bit, to try and get Housing First out there, areas to focus on. So, it was intense, but I can see why it's necessary, to make sure that validity is kept to, to keep the project going, and to make sure that when we're pushing Housing First out there into the community, that it's done properly, and that, you make sure that you do stick with the principles. And I think that going through that process has made sure that now, 5-6 years on, that we still keep those principles at the forefront, because they were so drilled into us at the beginning when it started, absolutely necessary. So yeah, I think it was intense, but it was good to be part of, and it's still lasting now. We still have such a good relationship with Alex, meeting him on a regular basis to go over different things, and that's because we met him in the beginning, we spent lots of time with him, developed that relationship, which has made sure that Housing First is 6 years down the line now nearly. So it's been really positive.
Yeah, it's been fantastic to see how the project has kind of grown and developed. And for you, Alex, I guess you're the other side. You're the one kind of facilitating and delivering this reflective exercise for the first time. How did this feel from your perspective in terms of the contrast to the usual accreditation process?
Well, I should say that in both cases, so the initial accreditation process and then this reflective work, the main credit and the main hard work is done by the Housing First service in question. So bearing that in mind, what I would say is that for the reflective piece, it is quite nice to have to do a bit less, because again, we really wanted the team to have that opportunity to reflect and not be too prescriptive as Cymorth Cymru and kind of say, we're obviously looking back at the things that were in the original report, like the recommendations, because we made them, we stand by them until context changes. But we didn't want to, shape things too much. The team knows its clients. As citizens, they can choose a case study. They could have chosen, they can choose more than one if they want going forward. It's they can identify the lessons that they've learned. They can identify the key aims going forward, which is exactly what's happened and what's in the report. So that's the format. But again, we're not, we can be flexible around that. If the focus seems to be on one thing more than another, then this is very much shaped by the team in question. So that is quite nice from my perspective, but it's also a resource thing. We have other accreditation work going on all the time. So it's trying to balance all this in a kind of way that is constructive and, the supportive journey we want it to be, while being, being capable of doing all of this. So it's that pragmatism as well.
Yeah, many Housing First plates have been spun by Alex and Kat at any given time, and it's good to see the principles of flexibility, choice and control being applied to the service through this process, being a key principle in Housing First. So both of you, I guess, did it give you both, from both perspectives, an opportunity to kind of think about how things have changed and developed? So I guess, Abby, for you, as you say, you're out there, you and the team constantly delivering intensive services, and probably difficult to take a step back. We all want to be able to take step backs in our jobs, but finding the time and space to do that is really, really difficult. And were there kind of things in particular that you would highlight that you reflected on as part of this? Any kind of things that you'd seen develop or change since that last engagement with Alex?
I think obviously when we first met Alex, it was pre-COVID, which always comes into conversation because we've experienced such change since then. And Housing First is not, no different really. We experienced big change in that, and the demand for the service and the demand for those people who are in need of that support only grew. So obviously, it's hard to try and please everybody, isn't it, and get everybody on caseload that needs to be there with, we've only got a small team here in Conwy, Denbighshire, and obviously we're in rural North Wales. So like the housing stock, obviously was a big one that we've discussed on many occasions, myself and Alex, and the access to private landlords who are willing to take quite complex citizens, with the intense support attached. We don't have a lot of housing stock here, and that's one of the things that we faced since COVID, really. And it's just becoming more and more apparent. Obviously, we work alongside in particular, the Denbighshire Homeless Prevention Team to try and work alongside them and build relationships so that we can, support our citizens the best possible. But, I think everyone is going through the same, aren't they? Where we're just struggling for that. So we're firefighting in temporary accommodation the best we can, and sticking with those Housing First principles. But it does only take us so far, doesn't it? We can only do so much in temporary accommodation. We need those properties to get people out of temporary accommodation, get them into their own home, and support them the best that we can there to address any other issues that they may need support with. So it's a lot of learning and development in that time since we first met Alex compared to this time. And the light touch was appreciated because, as he said, it's very busy, it's very hectic, but it was just nice to touch base and to know that we were still doing what we should be doing. Yeah, definitely. And it's great to hear from you how strongly those principles and the commitment to them since that initial accreditation process I guess it's kind of run through like a stick of rock really throughout the team and has continued. So that's really, really great to hear. And Alex, from your perspective, revisiting this project, were there certain things that have continued to develop or things that have changed which kind of stick out for you really out of this process?
There's a couple of things that I would highlight. Again, I don't want to spoil the report too much, but just some things that kind of struck me. So it's the kind of mixture of sort of recommendations we made where basically the work has been done, and then areas like the one Abby just highlighted where it's still kind of challenging, and that's probably true all over. So, for example, one of the ones that we originally made was for a kind of more the need for more gender-informed work. So the case study in the team talked through and provided to us is a perfect example of exactly that. Another example would be we also recommended more working with, in a sensitive way, the local police. And now there are examples of the Housing First team and the police sitting in the same meetings and kind of, working together in that way. And then, as Abby's kind of alluded to, the recommendation to sort of develop more buy-in from both the PRS where possible and RSLs, that's tough, and that's an example of a kind of tough recommendation that could basically apply to most services. That's kind of hard all over the country and needs a kind of coordinated approach. But it was in the original report, so we've talked through it and reflected on it. And finally, the kind of lessons learned and the next steps that were identified by the team. It's really, it's always really valuable to me to be reminded that Housing First teams and people working in Housing First are always really they tend to be really honest about the sort of challenges and areas where they could do better. So one of the lessons learned that the team want to work on is to make a more robust loan working policy, because they've kind of identified, certainly at the time of writing the report, that people working in Housing First can often feel like they might be immune to issues that kind of affect people working on their own, and it's up to kind of the senior management of the team to kind of make sure that the support is there and kind of put into a policy. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of develops. But it's really just, all these examples are just really interesting. Some of them unique to this service, and others that will be kind of the sorts of things that we would expect to see kind of from any Housing First service, really. So it's just a really interesting mixture.
Yeah, and you're right. There are some issues that are very much out of the project's control. They're either under the control of other agencies, or they're kind of big structural national issues, like the issue around housing supply that we had a session on earlier, which is something that every single project in Wales is facing. And whether that's just general access to affordable housing, whether that's about getting sufficient prioritisation within allocations policies, it's all really, really tough. And I think one of the things, Alex, that we've sometimes reflected on is the accreditation process can sometimes bring to the fore some of these issues that then we as Cymorth on a national level really kind of lobby the Welsh Government over, and that's kind of been a kind of a byproduct, hasn't it, of the accreditation process, hasn't it?
Yeah. So in I think all, but certainly most of the reports that are done after that initial awarding for any service, there is that section on kind of nationwide or maybe further, but certainly Wales-wide issues and themes that have kind of come out of a particular process, or that are highlighted by members of the panel that award the accreditation at the end of that first bit of the process. So we try and specifically highlight those things so that readers and people in the sector can see what we've identified. And then, as you say, Katie, you, me, and our colleagues at Cymorth will then make sure that we're talking to Welsh Government about that, to other, appropriate people and organisations. So again, that kind of came out perhaps when we were developing the process. I wasn't necessarily thinking about that too much, but it certainly became apparent pretty quickly that was kind of a key part of the work.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, Welsh Government, as we've said throughout today, have kind of placed Housing First within, a broad range of policy and guidance documents. It's in the Ending Homelessness Action Plan, it's in the Rapid Rehousing Guidance. So, increasingly we're kind of quite rightly not viewing Housing First in isolation as this thing that kind of sits over here. It's absolutely core to any strategy to try and end homelessness. But that means that some of the systemic change that we need to see happen in terms of things like housing supply and the buy-in from other public services is really, really important and has to be part of that consideration. And, to the Housing First services out there, you've certainly got our commitment that we'll continue to bang the drum on all of those things on behalf of you. And please do continue to raise that, whether it's through formal accreditation processes, like the one that we're talking about today, or whether that's through attendance at the Housing First Wales network, where that's a great forum for people to raise different issues among friends and colleagues. Then please do keep engaging in that way. Abby, I wonder whether there's been anything that's come about from this reflective process that has maybe prompted either new work or new ideas, or maybe to kind of explore an issue in more detail or shift the emphasis back on something that maybe had fallen to the wayside. Was there any examples of that, which is, this reflective process has kind of given you a focus on certain things that you want to address going forward now?
I think just opening it up to more people is the biggest thing that one of, because obviously we cover Denbighshire Conwy, but we sit within Denbighshire in particular. We share an office with them, and I think they've started to really learn about Housing First and the complexities that people can come with. So they, there's been they've welcomed us with open arms really, and there's an awareness that Housing First, applying that to more and more people, whether it be on a less intense basis, but it does apply. They are the people that need it the most, and if we've got people in temporary accommodation across the board, the nature of it is that they're going to have a level of complex issues that we can support with, and that we can guide other teams to do so. We've also started we've been part of a new hub locally, which has been great, and just taking on that Housing First approach there of intense and open-minded and kind of anything goes really, which is Housing First, isn't it? Although we've got policies and procedures and stuff, it's person-centered, and if they want to tackle it and they want to explore something, we're open ears and we're willing to support with that. So it's been really positive.
Amazing. And I think, being able to kind of shout about Housing First, promote it more broadly, and definitely apply those sorts of principles in whatever context we're operating. We often say with things like today's Housing First event, it's, perfect for people who are working within Housing First services, but actually a lot of the things that we talk about are really relevant to all types of other homelessness services as well. And we would want to apply some of those Housing First principles to every area of work that people undertake. It's absolutely essential that we stick to fidelity for Housing First, but there's nothing stopping us applying those principles to other services to improve outcomes and experiences for people, for sure. We've got another question in. I think it might be to Alex. Are there any indicators that you've noticed through the accreditation process which points to people being more likely to need future support around a specific principle? So I guess, is there a kind of common theme during the accreditation processes that kind of focus on a particular principle and that more support is needed around some more than others maybe?
There are certainly recommendations we've made several times. So a couple that spring to mind would be, Housing First is by its very nature kind of flexible and not overly prescriptive, but there is still that element of having policies that need to guide it and that staff can refer to and so on. So a few times we've basically recommended that policies that are kind of specific to the model rather than, where an organisation delivers other kinds of support, a kind of general policy. Sometimes there are examples where we kind of feel like a more specific policy is needed. So that's one example. The other one is one I've already kind of mentioned, where a few times we've recommended, particularly earlier in the accreditation process, more dedication to delivering gender-informed support. And I think when Housing First was younger, and it was more likely that the people receiving support were that kind of, I don't want to say stereotypical, but that more traditional kind of, male kind of, that's changing. And that's something we've tried to change at Cymorth in terms of like that principle review, which was partly aimed at making it clear in the principles that there might be other people, including women, for example, less likely to sleep rough, who would benefit from Housing First support. And that is happening. And as I said, the example in the report we're talking about now, the case study there is a great example of that. So that's certainly something we've recommended a lot. And it's great to see in this example that specifically being acted on, which aligns with that hope that people who perhaps were not necessarily overlooked, but perhaps were not receiving that Housing First support are now more likely to, and people are learning about how to do that in a slightly more specialist and effective way.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly, I think, the focus on Housing First for women is really important. I think it's something that's gaining increasing prominence. I think certainly the kind of the principal disadvantage that women face is often slightly different to that men face. And there are further, as Nicholas Pleece was saying earlier, further safeguarding considerations, both in terms of the woman and particularly things like sexual exploitation, but also children, whether those have been removed or remain with the mother. So yeah, I think it is a really important issue that everyone needs to stay really focused on. And it was great to read that case study within the Conwy Denbighshire Reflective Exercise report that kind of really touched on some of those really important issues. And just in case you've not seen it, the report is available in the handout section that should be available to you on screen. So please do take a look at that. A lot of hard work was put into that. Really grateful to you both for sharing that, sharing your views on that experience. I think other people, other projects who might be waiting in anticipation for it to be their turn will have really benefited from hearing about how you approached it, some of the learning from it. And it's just heartening to hear how much those principles and fidelity to the principles remain at the forefront of your work, Abby, with your team. So thank you both for your contributions today. It's really appreciated.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Abby.
Cheers. Thank you.